please try and occupy the seats here on the floor, as we would like a full house to close out. Thank you.
I would like to request everyone sitting at the bleachers to please move forward because we are going to begin the panel discussion soon, and we would like everyone to please be seated forwards.
We'd like a nice full house at the floor, if possible. So anyone in the bleachers, if you see a free seat on the floor, please feel free to come down. Thank you. I would like to welcome you all once again to the conference, and we are now headed towards the panel discussion session. May I please invite on stage the esteemed plenary, Mr. Faustine Masalu from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism of Tanzania, Ms. Margaret Maimba, the Cabinet Secretary, National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation, Kenya, Mr. David Karanja Migwi from Kenya Wildlife Service, Mr. Ali Salim, Member, UN Export Advisory Group on Youth, Peace and Security, we will also be joined by Dr. Suleri, the Executive Director at Sustainable Development Policy, Skype. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Clarissa Urita, who was also a member of the panel discussion but is left already, but she did set the tone for the panel discussion and the way forward. So,
hello,
thank you, Dr. Clarissa.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me? Okay, great. I can also hear you. Hello?
Yes, right. I can hear you.
Yeah, great. Yes, I'm available.
Respected panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I think first, thanks to the audience for staying back so late and being part of this discussion. I think I think this is the last session, so probably I should also take this opportunity to thank all of you who have come from different parts of the world, and for those who actually couldn't make it because several uh, uh, political and financial challenges. So in this panel, we will be discussing on how to move forward from now after having a very strong discussion on science, technology, innovation, addressing wildlife crime. Now, as you may all know, people who have worked on science technology issues, at the end of the day, implementation is all about political will. Whether it's enforcement or whether it is monitoring, it requires a lot of political will. So how do we address these issues and how to overcome the current challenges in the South would be the priority of this panel discussion. So before that, I want to narrate a few stories about my personal experience. I did my PhD in Africa. My PhD research area was on studying about Lusaka Agreement and what implementation of wildlife enforcement monitoring system in Africa. I had the opportunity to work with LATIF for a very long time. One day, one evening, when I went to meet the director, he was sitting in a dark room with no lights. So I asked him, why are you sitting here in the dark room in the evening at 6 p.m.? They said, Remy, I'm thinking about a solution. So I asked him, what is the solution? I don't have money to pay the staff, the salaries, and the driver has not been paid at all. So I'm paying the driver from my pocket, but I don't have enough resources to pay my staff in time. So this is a situation of institutions in the global South. Means they have the political will, they have the governance structure, but sometimes they don't have the financial backing or the mandate to implement what they really want. I think Lusaka Agreement is definitely one of the organizations among the wildlife enforcement network. So I think, this is the reality on the situation in Africa. But I really also would like to have Mr. Kanami Ikeda to join the panel for the discussion. So please, Mr. Kanami Ikeda is a very important member to the panel. He's a former diplomat with the Japanese government, and he's currently the president of Remote Sensing Technology Center of Japan. And the next case I want to tell, again related to this conference, comes from South Sudan. We had an assessment of all the countries about the databases and infrastructure in Africa. And South Sudan actually promptly replied. South Sudan is not a member of CITES, but they promptly replied to the assessment of databases on our request. So when we asked them to come over, because they had a very interesting case to say about the infrastructure, and when we asked them to come for the conference, they said that they don't have the financial means to make it. The reason is South Sudan, the salary of the person was $80 a month. I repeat, it's $80 a month. And that too, he would not get in time. So he was telling, if I cannot pay, if I'm not getting $80 a month, my salary in time, how do you expect me to come to the conference paying $1,500 for a flight? So this is some of the realities that we have to face in the conservation sector. In many of the conservation organization or conservation sector runs on external funding. You can look at the situation in Congo as well. It's the same where conservation organizations, international NGOs are supporting many of the activities as well. So we need to develop a new model of governance, of financial mechanism to bring out science and technology and innovation into these countries where the natural resources are really based. So in this panel, I think we will be discussing about this framework. We have the technological framework already discussed in the panel, so we won't go deep into those issues. So we will more look into the governance framework. So I would start with the panel with David. First of all, I would like to ask you, you're from Kenya, and you worked on the wildlife sector for a very long time. How do you see the use of science technology in the wildlife conservation in the two perspectives? One is on the as a developing nation, and second is on the implementation, application, and on the financial sustainability of the technology.
Thank you very much. Good evening. After the discussion we've had since yesterday, we've had this second day of very fruitful engagement, and listening across all the presentations, right from the opening ceremony and the remarks by our guests up to the last presentation by Mr. Edward Fido from Latif. I think what came through is that we all have similar challenges, we have similar interests, and that's why we're here. The South-South, be it from Asia or Africa or any other developing world. And those challenges that we are experiencing as we try to conserve our natural-based resources, be it wildlife forest, requires us to have innovative solutions to address them. And this brings in the issue of application of science and technology and innovation, which will assist us to combat or prevent these crimes. And from where I come from Kenya, as a developing country and a country that relies on its the natural-based resources for our growth and livelihood, there's been, to a great extent, the use of the applicable technologies, but we could do more, and this is why I now bring in the element of cooperations. Having sat here and listened to what is available in other regions and other countries, there's much that we can share, and this brings in the issue of how can we transfer this technology or skills that exist. We've succeeded as well. We've seen the best practices, and some of these are low cost. Doesn't have to be very expensive to roll out on a large scale. If we had some engagement on how we can transfer the technology, the skills, the best practices from other regions, they can be applicable in our station, because I said we have similar challenges. The other one is the challenges that we face when we are rolling out these technologies mainly could be funding. Conservation is very expensive. We are talking about having many boots on the ground, these rangers who require patrols, who require vehicles, who require aerial support. Now we are venturing to the area of UAVs and drones. In itself, those are just a product, possibly the unmanned aerial vehicles, but we need the solutions, and we need support in terms of infrastructure. Talking about connectivity, we're talking about the skilled manpower with the capacity to interpret whatever comes out. So I'm looking at enhancing the capacity of personnel to interpret and make use of the technology that we have. But I'm seeing more hope coming from this engagement. There's interest. All speakers and the participants, when we're discussing it, we discuss it out of passion. You could see the passion, and I think with that, we have that basis when you have the passion and the commitment. And I'm sure if we get the commitment from our top leadership at the policy level, and the policy, our governments, our institutions will support us if we see the products. Once they have the products that we produce, then they'll get all the support. So I'm seeing a bright future if we have this technology transfer and that political commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I would ask the same question to Margaret. Margaret, what is your thought on the way forward?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of us. Yeah, thank you very much. I will talk about sorry. What happened? I don't have anything.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Yesterday, as I listened, I'm not really a practitioner in wildlife or forest area, but I sit in one board which is in charge of forestry research. As I listened yesterday and throughout the presentations that have come forth, I realized that the issue of technologies is really a major thing if we have to really protect our wildlife and forestry. And as I listened, there are various technologies that are being utilized by different countries. And may it be, use of geospatial technologies, the GPS, and issues of remote sensing. And it came out clearly that each of these technologies, they play unique roles, but are independent. But they are independently used, but they can also be integrated so that they can help us do more than we are doing now. And I also realize there are quite a number of challenges in that these technologies are not really fully utilized, possibly due to capacity, possibly due to lack of finances to purchase some of these softwares, and it becomes very expensive even for the government. There is also lack of collaboration between the state agencies. State agencies are not even sharing what they have, the type of infrastructure, equipment that they have. And it also came out clearly that the issue of digital, the digital information, though important, was not admissible in court, and it is very, very important as evidence. Funding, another challenge. And then when I looked at all these things, I thought that the way forward to some of these things will be if we could look at our legal structures, legal frameworks that possibly need to be reviewed and also updated to our present situations, because technologies are changing all the time. And also we need to listen to identify better use of the technologies that we have. We need to come and work as teams. We can borrow from what another country is using. It can also be utilized in this other country. And it can only happen if we work together as a team. Technology transfer is important in this also. And we need also to avail finances to the relevant agencies so that they are able to do the activities properly. Also, there is need for capacity building. We realize that these technologies, if one does not have enough capacity, that's how they are underutilized. You need to have capacity for you to be able to use these technologies. Again, because we have seen that we have got various technologies, and we are saying that there is possibly need to integrate them so that we can use them effectively. Possibly, as I said yesterday, we might think of coming up with a working group to see how we can form or how we can integrate some of these technologies. And then one way forward, we looked at, from this conference, we will come up with our way forward. If you look at the representation of the participants today, we have got more Asian countries that are participating in this conference. The African participants, they are few. And even if we cannot really purport to be representing our African governments, if I look at ourselves, possibly we are just East African and not even, I don't think even we make a quorum. My suggestion is that we may need to have another forum in Africa so that we can also be able to come up with an African way forward, because countries have got different needs. We cannot say that what the Asian countries need is the same as what the African countries need. We need to have a such forum possibly in Africa so that we can come up with a way forward. And together at another level, possibly at a higher level, we can be speaking to one another, possibly with a view to coming up with a consensus, an understanding. Because at the end of it all, we are trying to tackle a common problem. That is wildlife and forest crimes. So, Mr. Chairman, what we are saying is we need to work as a team, because what the Asian countries are going through, they have the same problem with the African countries. All of us, we are tackling. We want to come up with solutions that will help us to combat wildlife and forest crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And you've taken the discussion to the next level, beyond the science technology framework more into cooperation framework. And I would like to further ask Mr. Faustin from the Tanzania Wildlife Division about his opinion about this.
Thank you. Well, moderator, first of all, we have to make a situation analysis of the current situation of the world. Since yesterday, I have been hearing concern of different presenters and the members of the floor. They expressed their concern concerning this poaching. I called poaching, this is an international organized network. Start from the source, and Africa has been a source of these trophies or wildlife resources which are poached. When I say are poached, they are trafficked illegally without the consent of the owner of the resources. And these are used with high-level technology. By looking at that situation, we analyze it. In order to disrupt the network, it will need as well as a well-advanced technology. Among ourselves, we have gaps in technology. You can't compare. There are Japanese here, Japan and East Africa. I think Japan is higher in the level of technology. But we have a common understanding. We are facing the same problem. Now we have to synergy and to synchronize our forces in order to disrupt this is unavoidable for sharing, let me call sharing of technology. And those who have to donate to those who don't have. And to put aside our differences if we want to forge ahead and to protect. As I said yesterday, these are the world resources, not limited to Kenyans, not limited to Tanzania or to Thailand or to Nepal. These are for the world and for the coming generation. Now, we are professionals here, experts of the wildlife or in forest aspect. It's hard time now for us to take this and advise the high levels. For we can't make decision because even me with my neighbors Kenyans, we are all the East Africans. We have the common anti-poaching strategy. Also, we have common anti-poaching strategy of the SADCs for the Southern African countries. But when it comes to use and utilization of the resources, we have different policies. And the decision which can be made by Kenya probably cannot be the same of that of the United Republic of Tanzania. But the problem is the same. Now, as I said, we put aside, I concur with Margaret here that maybe for us, here the presentation of Asian countries is soundable comparing to that of Africa, because here I see we are Kenya and Tanzania, and East Africa itself is 5 states. But we should have a common understanding and be advocate for our core. That I think is at the time to impact technology from the lower level of our people up to the experts. There is no way we can forge ahead. If we want the resources to survive, the forest and water resources, we should have to introduce this technology, combination of technologies which are currently used in the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Faustin. That's a very good input. And as the 3 panelists mentioned, there is the need for capacity building, technology awareness, and of course, a common ground of cooperation that is important for implementing the technologies as well as to moving forward in addressing the major problem of wildlife crime. Now, let me ask the next panelist, Mr. Kanami Ikuda, who is a former career diplomat and whom I would look into for to information on how we can enhance this knowledge sharing, capacity building, and the cooperation process in a regional or a global forum.
Well, thank you very much, Remy-san. As was introduced by my colleagues, our organization has been engaged in technology transfer. I mean, in a way, knowledge sharing with developing countries for many years, almost 40 years, in regard to the usage of remote sensing. That's why I'm here. But as introduced by Remy-san, I have been fortunate to be serving to the government as a diplomat for many years. But my background is rather science and technology, and that's why I think this is a good opportunity for me to be exposed to this question. As I mentioned earlier at this conference, it was quite recent that I was directly exposed to this question of wildlife question. But maybe perhaps many of you must be familiar that the Japanese government, as government official, I have to mention that this way. My government has been engaged for many years, almost 10 years, in a dialogue with African countries. We call it TICAD. And 2 years ago, the TICAD 5 big convention was organized in Nairobi, Kenya, inviting head of state of African countries, and our prime minister was there to get engaged in direct dialogue with African countries for development. But But because my knowledge already exposed to the question of this existence of this question, I found it's just a shame. But even with such very important occasions, there was nothing about this question, wildlife protection or combating with wildlife crime. So somehow my understanding is that if my country could be thinking of something, I mean, working with substantial matter with African countries, this subject to be addressed. And also, I mean, we are now engaged somehow the approach to associate with the development of African countries, not African countries only, but with other countries. And this sort of question should be addressed, and also a good subject for us. And that's how I have been engaged in some dialogue with government officials in this way. And I could have a chance to visit Nairobi last year and visited my friend and the Lusaka Task Force Agreement and our friend and Kenyan government. And I somehow deepened my conviction this way. That's why I want quite appreciative of the effort this time in AIT to have organized this meeting, and I could hear many experiences from people who have been engaged in this issue for many years. So I'm now renewing my understanding of this question, and also that how because the TCAD 7 is scheduled for next year. This time it could be organized somewhere in Japan. So my motivation is somehow for my country to address this issue. That's why I even like to somehow work with African colleagues. If we are to address this issue, there should be the effort from both sides. Otherwise, we can be successful. That's why with my experience in this way, I like to somehow work to continue this effort. And also, my desire is to see this continued effort this way could be organized by using some United Nations organizations or something else. Because we have already many existing schemes for international collaborations. Why not? We could be. I think there could be good chance for us to just utilize this sort of some mechanisms. And also, we could learn even the SDGs. It's shared among my colleagues, even government, even business sectors as well. So I think the question could have some good reason to be addressed in a collective manner. That is a way for me to associate myself with African colleagues, and also that maybe many of you here, to work together for future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ikeda, for that valuable input. As we noted that sometimes, even when governments from the developed world go forward with cooperation agreements, the main priority from the developing world is not sometimes on wildlife and wildlife crime, as we saw in the ticket scenario which Mr. Ikeda explained. So that means we still have to go a long way in getting the state buy-in into addressing wildlife crime. We saw it happening in the Tiger Initiative with Putin, President Putin, and then we have the President of Nepal also giving a commitment at this conference. We had previous governments also from the United States also coming forward with addressing, also the Prince Charles and the UK government also highly committed. but how much is the commitment from the global south is still an issue that has to be discussed. And I think the best person to answer that would be Mr. Salim. I welcome you. Would you?
Thank you so much. I must confess that my background is not from either sort of wildlife and forest protection or anything to do with science and technology. I am a political scientist with a focus on political mediation and political negotiations. And I somehow got engaged in the conversation, and there was a suggestion that come and hear what kind of conversations take place at this venue. And I mean, what I'm going to say is purely, it's a theory, and there is nothing substantial around it. And I'm merely trying to respond to instruction or guidance coming from Honorable President of Nepal, from Minister from Pakistan, and from Honorable Permanent Secretary from Thailand, who in their opening statement called for a South-South cooperation and called for ways and means to come together and collaborate, have a larger collaboration among southern countries. So could I have that picture on, please? This is purely wild thinking, and there is no harm in dreaming as well. So we took that pretext. When we were discussing the topics which were going on in the plenary, we are grateful that AIT gave us a private room to sort of reflect, think, and consult. We had discussions with many colleagues in this conference. We realized that it is fairly complex matter to handle. Countries need to come together. It's also connected with the structural arrangements in the countries, and it's also a clear connection between the national security and sovereignty of states and in all sides. It is also extremely essential that the ownership and the leadership remains with the countries which are at the receiving end. So in my work, as I said, it's a political negotiation, mediation. When I look at a power paradigm, we use a kind of a triangle where we have a track one. I'll start with track three. Track three is very broad power base where you have communities or the local representative which come together. Then you have a track two of engagements where you have civil service, structures, civil society, academia, organized groups, informal groups, but still part of larger society. And track one where you have a very narrow sort of power concentration. That's where heads of states or the councils where the state sovereignty lies and state authority is focused. So when we looked at existing mechanisms, you have commitments, efforts, and what we were hearing in the conference, it was all quite a lot of conversation on coordination, networking, information exchange. But in real politics, when you exchange information, you can actually be targeted for committing espionage or giving out your national security details. So you got to be very, very careful. What we didn't find is a mechanism where states, actually southern states, and the leadership of those southern states could come together. So basically the sort of, suggestion or a request for way forward. Again, I said it's a theory. There is nothing at all. The reason I didn't even put it on computer, I said people might think that we have been thinking about it for ages. It's purely in the back room, sitting and drying and trying to articulate thoughts as we went along in the last 2 days. And what we are looking at is possibility of setting up a mechanism or a medium where heads of states could come together. States do have the ability to come around a common or perhaps one agenda as a policy guidance to all who want to help them. The facility, it could be South-South Enhanced Cooperation Initiative, or if we find a one good champion, that nation can take the name and it could become initiative of that state, an ability to draw larger South. The reason South-South is important, you do not want to create silos. ASEAN, SAARC, West Africa, South Africa, these silos will create division on agendas. And if you really want unanimous agenda, you have to keep it together, find a way to put it together. And if a meeting of South-South heads of state from 35 countries decide on one issue, it would make lives of people in this room a lot easier, that you would understand in which direction all of us are going. And most importantly, it would create very clear policy framework for your development partners. You would be able to articulate your real needs, national security concerns, development concerns, your development priorities. They change with governments. They change every 3 to 5 years. You have to look at your own reality. 20 years ago, it made sense to send a poacher to a prison, but now I think with the new concepts in law enforcement, you really need to look and discover what is out there. Don't use, criminal justice. Maybe retributive justice is better for you. But who is going to do that research? That research facility is not there. So, and if this research is done somewhere else, larger South will have a buy-in issue. They will say, look, it's coming with an agenda. So why not to have a facility which provides research gaps, which provides support to states to interact with each other at the highest level, but at the same time, it is a facilitation ground as well. There is a circle, if you see, it's a gray zone, which we call it 1.5. 1.5 is important that it's not the decision makers, but it's just below the decision makers, where you can actually get guidance from decision makers, from heads of states, head of governments, and translate it into strategic dialogues with your development partners, with multilaterals, with MNCs, with INGOs, to make sure that activities and engagements resonate with whatever priorities are being articulated by heads of state. So a mechanism, initiative, it could be an intergovernmental mechanism, it could have a structure, it could have a full buy-in on values and principles which are agreed by southern states. But again, my suggestion and request is that keep it together, so there is a uniformity of approach, uniformity of understanding, and most importantly, uniformity of articulation, so international community could hear you well and clear. This could be a block to lobby Southern agenda on wildlife at the highest levels, whether it be UN, whether it be other mechanisms. But again, Southern countries coming together, standing together, and being able to articulate their needs, their requirements, and most importantly, their ability to direct the scene. So I would finish it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ali, and it's a very important point that you raised here. I think one issue that came out of this panel is that there's a lot of needs that still, there's a lot of need that is required in the developing states or in the southern region. But there is a lack, I don't say lack, but I think there's still a need for a bigger commitment from the heads of states of these countries to give wildlife a priority. We've seen it from the example from the ticket, last year's ticket, from what has happened. They have not raised the issue of wildlife poaching, though it was a big issue during the time. And again, from Mr. Ali's presentation, we know that the states have to raise the profile of understanding about how they look into poaching and the illegal wildlife crime. And that it is, I think we have colleagues from Interpol also here who can later in the discussion part can add into that discussion of how high level this poaching is and how connected it is with the organized crime. So sure, I will take a few questions from the. Oh, there's one more person. Yeah. Panel. Can I would from Pakistan, and can we connect? Mr. Habib.
I'm very much connected.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Habib. We would like to have your views. So thank you very much for joining us from Pakistan. And we are discussing here about the needs and requirements of developing countries, mainly the Global South. And we would like to know, our discussion is centering around self-reliance and knowledge sharing and how this can be achieved. So if you can you kindly put your thoughts into the same? Hello, Mr. Habib.
Yeah, I'm available. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
First of all, let me say my thanks for allowing me to join this group, though remotely. It is a great privilege, and of course, the whole discussion around South-South cooperation and around preservation of biotechnology, biodiversity, that is quite fascinating, and especially because this is something which is being initiated by developing countries. Of course, when I look at the organizers, Asian Institute of Technology, Department of National Parks, Wildlife and Plant Conservation Thailand, and UN agencies. So, of course, this whole initiative is a very welcome move. Now, let me briefly share my thoughts on why the South-South cooperation on biodiversity protection and combating forest crime is important for SDGs. But before that, perhaps we need to go back and try to see that why MDGs, our track record of achieving MDGs was a partial success and partial failure. And to me, one of the reasons is there was this inherent contradiction between MDG 1 and MDG 7. MDG 1 is poverty reduction and MDG 7 was environmental conservation. Now, one can argue that you can have two different ministries, two different departments dedicatedly working, one ministry for poverty reduction, other ministry for environmental conservation, and chances were that they could have been contradicting each other's efforts. And this can be a possibility with SDGs if we de-link our attempts to avoid climate change, our attempts to conserve environment, our attempts to preserve biodiversity, our attempts to combat forest crime, if we de-link them with economic growth. So the first point I wanted to emphasize here, that through the South-South cooperation, we have to somehow make sure that this contradiction between MDG 1 and MDG 7, that doesn't get repeated and doesn't put the whole SDG agenda in jeopardy. Of course, many of us, we know that part of the reasons that biodiversity is exploited in the South, where of course is the hub of the biodiversity, and part of the forest crimes, those are due to economic needs. One can argue that there can be such crimes for need, and one can argue that there can be such crimes for greed. So while controlling the crimes for greed, it comes under multilateral negotiation and multilateral discussion. We should not also somehow ignore such crimes which are done purely because of need. And it is the duty of the governments, governmental agencies, of the United Nations agencies, to somehow cater those needs. Now, the second point that I wanted to make here was that MDG, part of the reason it was a failure, because it was perceived as an external agenda. So many countries, including my own country, our decision makers, we thought that it is something which is being dictated by external donors, and they would also provide funding so that we can comply. But SDG is our own agendas, and SDG, if we are conserving our biodiversity, if we are preserving our forest, it is not due to any external dictation or any external wishes. It is in our own interest. And of course, we owe to protect our resources. And these two things, perhaps, they will make the basis of next few minutes, the 3 or 4 minutes that I want to use. And I'll start with an example. A few years ago, we went to this Hindu Kush Himalayan region of Pakistan, and the project was to sensitize the communities to save the snow leopards. And while we were doing our preaches, one farmer, he stood up and he said that, Dr. Sunari, your speech is very good, but if you tell me, if a snow leopard come in the evening and if he eats your cow, the only cow which is the bread and butter for your children and your family, what would be your priority? Would you save your cow or would you save your the snow leopard? And I was speechless for a few minutes because I had no justified answer for the question that he was asking. And I think this is the starting point when we are talking of South-South cooperation. And Ali Salimi rightly mentioned, as a bloc, we need to tell the rest of the global community some of the reasons why biodiversity and why natural resources they get exploited in our part of the world. And if the major reason for such exploitation is the needs of the communities, then we need to think of some alternatives. The same goes for forest-related crimes. If in Himalayan region of Pakistan or in Nepal or India, where the temperature in winter is minus 15 or minus 20 degrees Celsius, and there are no heating arrangements for cooking or for warming the houses, people, they would have to somehow chop the trees during summer, and they would have to save as a food for winter. So again, we are talking of providing some substitutes, providing some alternatives. And if as a global community, we want to achieve these SDGs, SDG 15, biodiversity, SDG 16, combating organized crime, and SDG 17, the whole social equity, then of course we need to think of bringing this social equity among our countries, among communities, and for that we need to learn from each other. South-South cooperation, it essentially tells us the best practices which are being adopted by our southern partners, and lesson learned from the attempts that got failed. And this learning from successful examples and avoiding what failed is a key for South-South collaboration. Now when we are talking of the role of science, technology and innovation, of course the first role of science, technology and innovation is about providing the substitutes that I mentioned. Solar energy, for example, can be a substitute to warm our houses and cook food in the areas where forests they are chopped only for cooking and for warming your houses. Similarly, science and technology can be used not only to remote sensing of biodiversity and wildlife, but also, for example, in case of snow leopard where they are attacking the cows. Of course, instead of killing those snow leopards, the use of science and technology for early warning, for some sort of automated sensors, light sensors and alarm sensors, so that they can run away instead of attacking the cattle. Those can be utilized, and these are very practical examples that I'm giving. But more technical is coming up with a baseline. So now when the countries would start reporting their progress on SDGs, we need to have a reliable baseline on the existing biodiversity, reliable baseline on existing flora and fauna in our countries. And for that, of course, this science and technology, this is one of the prerequisites. So the whole notion of technology transfer by certain countries and a demand by certain countries and developed world, I think this is one of the concrete things that this conference can propose, so that we can have a realistic and reliable baseline on which we can then start reporting. And that would also help in data collation and data analysis. Again, this is an area where partnerships, South-South partnership, North-South partnership, and triangular partnership, that would become extremely important. And finally, I would reiterate the resolve of the government of Pakistan. You might have heard the message of the climate change minister of Pakistan, who incidentally is also the global vice chair of IUCN. So Pakistan is quite lucky that we have decision makers in place who are sensitized and who are already aware of this situation. And as a member of international community and as a member of Southern Bloc, I can give this assurance on behalf of my government on this track 1.5 that Alicia Naeem very ably identified, that Pakistan would be more than happy to be part of any consortium, any bloc, any alliance whereby we can talk of preserving and conserving the biodiversity and forest, not only for our communities and for our countries, but something which is a global heritage. And of course, by virtue of this heritage lying in our countries, the main responsibility lies on us, but the developed world, they can't absolve themselves from their obligation and their duties. They have to again work in tandem and work in hand with the Southern Bloc, so that this South-South cooperation, it can be meaningful, it can yield some positive results. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Avish, for the wonderful presentation. And I think, and thank you for the commitment from Pakistan, government of Pakistan, for this cooperative initiative. I think, as you rightly mentioned, there's so many needs that has to be addressed, probably, which goes beyond technology, which is also about communities and addressing the community needs. So probably, I think these are things that we could address, that we could look into, and see how we can bring up. As we earlier said, the primary objective is to get the heads of state of southern region or the developing countries to be more aware and more committed into addressing wildlife-related issues, especially poaching and illegal wildlife crime. So I would like to take a few questions from the floor. If anyone, if you'd like to come up, have any questions for the panel or a general question. I may actually request Mr. Mark from Interpol to give some insight into the wildlife crime and organized crime issue in developing countries. If we have been discussing the topic for a long time, and Interpol is here, so it'd be really nice to know the insight of Interpol.
Hello.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, what was your question, Remy?
Yeah, I was wondering. My question is, how prevalent is organized crime, especially related to wildlife crime, in the southern countries?
Massively. It's again another commodity to add to the list. Wildlife crime, like any other crime, moves on to being part of the monetary pot for organised crime. There is a differential level between survival, as our colleague was saying a moment ago, and crime itself. Survival, if you have to take the life of whichever animal you need to take to survive, then you will do it. If you need to chop a tree down, you will do it. If you need to deal drugs,
you will do it to survive and to live as a human being. However, there is then a line where comfort becomes greed, and greed turns to more money, and more money turns to more money, and then eventually we move into organised crime. And that cycle runs around. Organised crime is about money, business is about money. We were talking about funding earlier on and donors. That's about money. Our jobs are about money, and it's all about that comfort level. Where do we sit? Where are we in the chain? And people who judge others for needing or wanting to survive need to reflect on where they are within that comfort chain. If you are needing to survive, then we need to reflect upon that. And there needs to be more of a rehabilitation method, as we were saying earlier. There needs to be other options, there needs to be education, there needs to be systemic change within states and countries. That is something that, again, takes money, and governments feed into the pot that create these issues. So it's a bigger question, and a question that needs to be dealt with on a interactive level throughout not only environmental issues, but we had the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime here yesterday, and again they are here because they understand that everything sits side by side.
Thank you, Mark.
Any questions, anything on that while I'm here?
Thank you, Mark. That's a very good insight. And the whole issue about crime is related to money, and so we need to have a very integrated approach in addressing the problem. So, is there any more questions? Yes.
Thank you for giving the floor. This is not actually a question, but some comments and my experience sharing. Basically, that conservation has the two aspects. One is social aspects, one is resource itself. So apart from resource itself, for social aspect, it is very important. We all of us will agree that if we can focus more on social aspect, then conservation will be much easier. And in this case, social aspects, we must focus on making people aware by following the politician. Before an election, we see that the politicians go to the people door to door for campaigning. So that the outreach activity which we are doing in many countries, so the conservation awareness campaign, we are doing this one, they should follow the politicians' approach. We are doing what we do. We call some people in a gathering, and we say, we try to motivate people about the value of conservation or for conservation. But if we take in our daily routine work, we should go to the door of the community living beside the national park or forest conservation area. Then I think this work for wildlife conservation will be much easier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more? Yes, from Tanzania.
This given the size of these areas, protected areas, tourism cannot be, phototourism cannot be done in all these areas. So in other areas, we need to utilize the wildlife itself to be able to manage these areas. So we all agree that innovation of technology is very important, but really involves a number of players at this level, at middle level managers, and more importantly, the rangers. So we all need to make this important.
Thank you. Yes, yes, Mr. Secretary.
In responding to the question raised by the gentleman, I come to recall the word mentioned by the gentleman at the left-hand side end yesterday. He used the word intelligence-led interception. I think in order to prevent such crime. I think so. This intelligence part could mean a lot. We could use many kinds of information, even from satellite or drone, whatever, even in the ground. But we need somehow, in order to use better such data, we need to use other knowledge as regards to the location or history or behavior or your experience itself. So then we could use it as an intelligence. That's how we could somehow address the way to somehow prevent such possible crimes. So this intelligence part could mean a lot for us as an effort to best utilize our resources, and also that somehow we could call upon the collaborations among relevant agencies. I think this part could somehow be the good subject for us to address commonly as a collective action throughout even in the different situations. That's my somehow the sense that come at this moment. Thank you very much.
Then thank you, Mr. Ikuda. And any more comments from the floor? Yes, Mr.
Just wanted to make the last point. I mean, if there is consensus within the conference that there is a need for a mechanism or a way forward. Way forward could be that setting up a experts group to study what kind of animal do we need to take the next steps. And it has to be geographically, gender and all the sort of technical aspects balanced group which would study that what kind of mechanism is required. Would it be a intergovernmental institute? Would it be a part of a government's foreign policy, foreign department, or would it be part of a government's patronage, or whatever it's going to be? There has to be a experts group which would study the feasibility of a new mechanism, basically South-South cooperation mechanism.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. I think this is a very important point that has been raised here. So far in the history of CITES convention or in the international trade or regulation of wildlife crime, there has been several expert groups, but not exclusively for one on the South-South cooperation related initiative. And I think it's time to think about how the Global South can actually bring out an enforcement team to look into this, or a scientific or even a policy team to actually look into it and even form a kind of a framework so that it addresses some of the issues that we looked into, as the honorary panelist actually mentioned, some of the issues regarding capacity development, because there's a lot of capacity development that is required in most of the developing countries. The financial issues is a big issue which has to be addressed as well, and how they can be self-reliant, which is the most important issue that has to be which calls for the sustainability of wildlife resources in the global south. So how do we make up and how do we form this framework? I think probably I should take one round of questions with the panelists, and probably I should end up due to the time question. I'll give you 1 minute each, and how do you see through an expert panel, formation of expert panel for addressing this wildlife issue? Please be very, because of time limit, I have only 1 minute each for.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think on the issue of the expert group to determine the mechanism of the possibility on the proposed, or if you have to consider the South-to-South cooperation mechanism, I think is a welcome idea in that we need to have inclusivity in terms of experts from different fields, the practitioners themselves, the policymakers, and more importantly, the political leadership, because this will set the pace. Once we have the buy-in and the buy-in or the champions from the top leadership, possibly in our countries or organizations at a higher level, then the rest will flow. The rest will just align our operations according to the political will. So I think we need to be inclusive in whatever we do. I think that would be my take. And there are opportunities that exist, and there's I can see a goodwill commitment from the states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not want to repeat what my colleague has said, but there is need for inclusiveness, whereby even as we bring on board the experts, the policy makers are also important because they are the decision makers. Please bring on board the relevant people who can assist us. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Yeah. For this one, there should be political will, and political will should be brought about by the wildlife experts who will convince the policymakers on this issue, because they know what their policies say about conservation and tackling this issue. The second issue is to have this, the third countries or developing countries, they should be to stand on their own on this issue. Because if we say that, okay, we are begging to the developed countries, they come with their hidden agendas, and they will say our resources are ours. And from there is where we experts, we have to educate the decision makers how to forge ahead with the issue. Thank you.
I agree with the idea of creating an expert group, and maybe just a bit of effort to clarify the terms of reference and find sponsor. Okay.
I thought that was my last line. We are up for sale now. Who's going to fund it? But it's not really cost-extensive exercise. But certainly, I think there has to be. Again, I leave the follow-up to AIT and see how they can do it. Certainly, there is support can be made available to configure TORs and what kind of inclusivity it should have. But important would be that the group should be able to carry the weight of larger South. And that's extremely important. It's also extremely important that we do not lose sight of bringing politics to, it's okay to bring politics into these things, because eventually it is political. So I think it's just, we have to keep the focus. So, but when we started discussing it, I was actually mentally prepared that we will fall flat. I'm quite thrilled that we didn't fall flat. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lee. And thank you, everyone. And it's been a very interesting session. I would conclude by saying that though there is a lot of ideological differences in many aspects, but we are together in addressing some of the main challenges, and that in policy terms it is called boundary work. There's a lot of literature on that, and I would say that this group of panel is actually the boundary workers, and probably the expert panel they are proposing could be the way forward for addressing some of the challenges in the global south. As we said, self-reliance is very important so that they can make self-decisions, and both in technology as well as financial. How do we do it? How do we bring it up? How we can move forward? I think you all are welcome into this, how to design this expert panel. I think it's scientists, technologists, and policymakers, irrespective of countries, can form into the panel so that we can all together help the countries which are in need to address some of the global challenges like wildlife crime, which is a bigger challenge in the global south than elsewhere. Once again, thank you very much, and it was a great pleasure to have you with us. And I hope the next session is closing ceremony, which I think I'll leave it to the organizers to make the next announcement.
We'd like to extend our thanks to all the panelists for all their insight, their deliberation, their thoughtful arguments.
Moving on with the program, we have now come towards the end of the conference and we are headed towards closing remarks. First, I would like to invite on stage Mr. Mon Bahadur Kharka, the Director General of the Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation, Nepal, on stage to please give his closing remarks.
Distinguished delegates, representative of partner organizations, esteemed professors, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. For the last 2 days, we have witnessed excellent presentations and intensive discussion on wider aspects of wildlife and forest crime linking with science, technology, and innovation. Live discussion on important issues ranging from formulation, development, and implementation of technological products and services to possible ways out for combating wildlife and forest crimes is one of the successes of the program. I firmly believe that the conference has been able to become an important platform to create understandings among each other and share the achievements, success stories, as well as prevalent shortcomings. On behalf of the Government of Nepal, Chief Enforcement Coordinator and SAWEN and one of the collaborators of the program, I am pleased to take this opportunity to thank you all for your delivery, invaluable contribution, and active participation. Honoring the remarks of Right Honorable President of Nepal, Madam Vidya Devi Bhandari, in bringing the fruitful outcome of the program, I would like to emphasize the need of extended collaboration of the participating countries and notably the Wildlife Enforcement Networks, Asian Center for Biodiversity, Lusaka Agreement Task Force, and South Asia Wildlife Enforcement Network. The collaboration might include joint operations, capacity building, activities, information, intelligence sharing, working on financial sustainability, and more. I am happy to announce here that SAWEN would be pleased to take lead role in taking forward the collaborative action by taking in confidence of all stakeholders To the present context, let us designate one point of contact from each wildlife enforcement network to take further initiation in this regard. Although there was a very good discussion in the panel discussion that the formation of expert group has been suggested, that also I would like to welcome. I would also like to propose to come up with a way forward to be taken to the upcoming CITES COP18 to be held in 2019 in Sri Lanka, how we all can move ahead and substantiating this as not an one-time event. I would like to invite all the development partners and other agencies for supporting us to initialize the broader cooperation sustainably. Lastly, the organizers are kindly requested to come up with a novel resolution that reflects the current status and need. I also like to request the organizers to share the outcomes with other organizations such as CITES and probable collaborative partners. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Could we please have next on stage Dr. Pinsak Suriswadi from the Department Director General of the Department of National Parks, Wildlife and Plant Conservation, Thailand.
Sawadee krap. Good afternoon. Dear our friend, as the Permanent Secretary of Monterey has started at the first day that Thailand has dutifully acted as a lead country for two ASEAN working groups. The first one is on CITES and wildlife enforcement, AWG, CITES and WE. And the second one is on illicit trafficking of wildlife and timber, or SOMTC. Thailand then assure you that we are seriously consider the matter of taking all necessary and efficient measures to tackling wildlife and forest crime. We also assure you to engage in the battle along with the wildlife enforcement network around the world with private sector, non-government organization, academia, and of course, local community. Those commitments are for reaching our common goal, that is to fight against transnational wildlife crime. To help strengthening South-to-South community, we are very grateful to support technical assistance for any country in need of technique in combating wildlife crime, including forensic science, smart patrolling, NCAPS technology, and wildlife conservation research, especially hornbill conservation, that Thailand have experts ready for supporting the training at both national and international level. Thailand would also like to propose to the three wildlife enforcement network, namely AWG, CITES, and WE, SAWEN, and Lusaka Task Force, if possible, to take turn to organize the WEN meeting or similar conference to this one. We shall meet at least once in every 2 years. The meeting or conference will discuss and exchange options on the various angles of cooperation in the prevention and suppression of wildlife and timber trafficking, as well as coordination in legal action and networking law enforcement agency amongst the wildlife enforcement network. Once again, on behalf of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment and Department of National Park, Wildlife and Plant Conservation, I would like to express my appreciation to all the speakers, panel members, and participants. I clearly appreciate the support we have received from all of you. Your presence has been invaluable and has helped make the event a great success. As tomorrow, some of you will join a field visit at the Khao Yai National Park, our World Heritage Site in northeastern Thailand. I hope you all have a wonderful time visiting there with no rain. Thank you. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you, Dr. Pinsak, for reiterating the importance of South-South collaboration
May we please now have on stage Mr. Edward Firiri from Lusaka Agreement Task Force for his closing remarks.
Good evening. Distinguished delegates, all partners present. First of all, allow me to thank the organizers of this conference, the Asian Institute of Technology, Department of National Parks, Wildlife and Plant Conservation, all collaborating partners, and all staff participants present for making this conference a success. As one of the collaborators, Lusaka Agreement Task Force, on behalf of the member states, is happy to be associated with this conference. We will always be ready to support and collaborate in the fight against illegal wildlife trade. Let me not overemphasize what has been agreed, the outcomes of this conference, which has come up with very good suggestions, among them which include scaling up political commitment to ensure that we get the desired support in the fight against wildlife crime. As Lusaka Agreement Task Force, like it was stated by one of our colleagues, we would like to see a similar process be implemented in Africa. And I think this is one of the issues we'll pick up and see if we can get one of the countries to hold such a conference. And we would also like to see that the practical steps of this conference are followed and implemented. Lastly, but not the least, I would like to thank Restec Japan, who made it possible that some of these, the African countries present here are here. With these remarks, I wish to thank you very much. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much for your kind words. And finally, for the vote of thanks, we would like to call Mr. Manish Lakul, Deputy Director, WEMS Secretariat.
Good evening. Well, I know clock's ticking and I'm perhaps the last person you want to see standing in front of you and going to talk about things, but I just couldn't withhold myself to really express my gratitude for all the support that I have received. And indeed, the last 2 days has been an immensely memorable journey. I think that has given us certain, in a way, mandate to take forward. And for this opportunity and this moment that we have arrived to, well, there has been a lot of contributions from a lot of different partners. And in that, of course, the immediate ones are the state and the non-state actors who actually even initially responded to the invitation, over 40 countries. But unfortunately, not everyone could make it. But even 30 countries, 30 plus countries that could really make it here, I'm really grateful for coming grateful towards you for coming all the way here. And also, of course, to the Department of National Parks, Wildlife and Plant Conservation, specific Dr. Pinsak and Pisomkiat, who's been very supportive throughout the process to make this conference possible. And then, of course, in addition to that, well, even a dream come true, or I don't know if I can even say a dream come true, that the message from the Right Honorable President of Nepal, the head of state, who really, well, changed the tone of this conference by the message that she sent and the leadership that she's shown and the commitment that she's giving to drive this agenda forward. And then, of course, the minister from Pakistan, who is His Excellency Mr. Malik Amin Aslam, who even in the first few hours or maybe first few days of taking the office actually managed to send some nice commitments to the conference and the supportive and warm words. And of course, a lot of thanks goes to the collaborators without whom I think this conference wouldn't have been here, and perhaps we wouldn't have had this venue and this outcome to look forward to. So a lot of thanks goes to ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, who's been engaging with us for quite a number of months to make this happen, and of course the European Union to fund this event through ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Then we have the Lusaka Agreement Task Force, who are, well, of course, an instrumental partner in this process, the National Institute for Environmental Strategies. We have Remote Sensing Technology Center of Japan, especially Mr. Ikeda-san, who has also been very supportive personally to this endeavor. And of course, the South Asia Wildlife Enforcement Network with the Chief Enforcement Coordinator and Mr. Pradeepji, who's been helping us in bringing this up in South Asia, and UNDP, who funded actually a part of the conference as well, and the assessment that we had undertaken. And the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, unfortunately, could not be here, but they have been an instrumental source of inspiration and support in the whole process. And then, of course, all the thanks to the panelists, the presenters, the speakers who have been giving all these valuable inputs and the directions on the way forward. Then all the other partners, all the other participants who've been listening through this and participating in these discussions. Of course, a sincere thanks goes to AIT for supporting and making this venue available for a real South-South discussion. And nothing could have been possible without support of all the volunteers, the DNP staff, and all the students, all the interns, and of course, some of my favorites. Here I'm being a bit biased, but Rehan, who's been very instrumental, standing just beside me, thick and thin, and Ja, who is more than just a colleague, a family, who's just stood by there quietly, solving all the problems that come up during the event. And of course, the conference staff and the caterers and everyone who made this conference possible. So, well, it's quite a bit of a burden that we have, but with the state support, the commitments, we really hope we will be able to take this forward, and hopefully we'll create some paradigm shifts in the way we look at, well, wildlife and forest crimes from now onwards. Thank you very much.